Masechet Baba Kama Daf Sadi Aleph. Yesterday, we saw the law that one makes an evaluation of a weapon, a murder weapon. The machloket was, do the judges have to see it themselves, or can they rely on the witnesses? But either way, one has to make sure, in order to make someone liable for murder, one has to make sure that the murder weapon was one that could kill a person. So that if I take a feather and just touch a person and suddenly they fall over and die, I am not liable, because I was no way for me to expect that touching someone with a little feather is going to make them die. I guess it's because of their weakness that they fell over and they couldn't withstand that. But instead, if I have a rock, so we look at this rock. If it's a big rock that could smash someone's skull and kill them, and I hit someone over the head, then I am liable. But if it's a small pebble that shouldn't kill someone, but this person happened to be especially weak, then I am not responsible. So we saw everyone agrees regarding murder that we have to make an evaluation of the weapon to see if it was worthy of killing a person. Now the question is, does that apply also to injuries? Yesh omed linzakin or en omed linzakin. When it comes to injuring someone, do we also have to evaluate and see this rock or weapon or item, was it worthy? Was it big enough and hard enough to cause this amount of damage? And if yes, you have to pay. And if we see that, no, it was just a little stick or just a little feather and it shouldn't have caused that much damage, so then one would not be liable to pay. Right? Do we say that, or does it not matter? Do we say on the one hand that it's only for murder that we say, regarding this type of weapon, is it sufficient to take a person's life or not? We only ask that question in terms of murder, but when it comes to damages, it doesn't matter. Even if it's a small item, if you cause the damage, we look at the consequence. Whatever you did resulted in damage. It doesn't really matter what the item was and what the weapon was. That's on the one hand, so you have to pay full damages no matter what. Or dilma lo shena, or is there no difference between murder and nizakin? And just like for murder, if it wasn't worthy of killing, I'm not liable to capital punishment. So too, for damages, if this thing was, no one would expect that a small thing like this would cause a lot of damage, then I don't have to pay. And the laws of murder and injury are the same. That's the question. We're going to try to answer it with a series of potential proofs. Ta shema ma bor sheyesh bo kedei lahamit 10 tefachim af kol sheyesh bo lahamit 10 tefachim hayu pechutin ma10 tefachim venafal letocho shor o chamor umet patur huzak bo hayav. A Mishnah earlier in the Masechet on Daf Nun said that when it comes to a pit, if it's deep enough that it would kill, right, then you're liable. And how deep is that? 10 tefachim deep. If I dig a pit 10 tefachim deep and an animal falls into it and dies, then I'm liable. So too, in all other pits, all other holes in the ground, I'm only liable for killing the ox if it is 10 tefachim deep. But if it's less than 10 tefachim deep and an ox or a donkey falls into it and dies, I am not liable, right? It was only 9 or 5 or 1 tefach deep, and this ox fell into it and it happened to be a especially weak ox that would die in such a shallow pit. That's not my fault. You can't blame me, and I am not liable. However, if for damages, that is a pit that's less than 10 tefachim deep does have potential to damage, and therefore I am liable for damages. I'm just not liable for killing it. Okay, so let's analyze. My labi mata lema'ala kachashivachi kamar mitefar vad 10 mita leka nizakin ika alman zakin kol tehu shema'mina and omdin linzakin. So this Mishnah, is it not assuming that it's counting from below to above, meaning from 1 tefach until 10, from a very shallow hole until 10 tefachim? That type of hole does not have potential to kill in a normal scenario, but it does have potential to damage. So even if it's only 1 tefach deep, that could cause damage. So you see that regarding nizakin, regarding damages, even a small amount has potential to cause damage, and I would be liable. And therefore, we can conclude that we do not make an evaluation regarding damage to see the item that I used, a pit or a weapon. We do not evaluate, but we go by the consequences. If it caused damage, I am liable, and we do not look at how much damage we think it would have caused, right? Because you see here in this Mishnah, it says 10 is murder, but anything less than 10, it can cause damage. We answer, no, this is not a proof. It could be, it's assuming that you're starting above 10 and going down. Nezakin ita mita leka. If it's 10, then from above 10 down to 10, pit can kill. But if it's a little less than 10, then it will not kill, but it will damage. But only a little less than 10 will damage. And so, therefore, I can say that you have to make an evaluation when it comes to damages, and for each and every circumstance, we see, would this cause damage? Is this likely to cause damage? So yeah, a little less than 10 would, but the Mishnah is only assuming a little less than 10. The Mishnah didn't say anything about if it's only 2 tefachim, or 1 tefach, or half a tefach. No, that probably wouldn't cause damage, and therefore I would not be liable in such a case. Mishnah is not assuming that one would be liable for a small amount. It was just saying from above down to 10, it can kill. Less than 10, a little less than 10, it will cause damage. A lot less than 10? No, maybe not. All right, so there's no proof from here. Second proof, Tashema, Hikau al eno v'simeo, al ozno v'cheresho, ebed yoseh bahen lehairut. The Baraita teaches that if someone strikes his ebed Kena'ani on the eye and blinded him, or hits him on the ear and causes him to be deaf, so he goes free, because these are wounds that will not get better, and he gains his emancipation. Keneged eno ve'eno ro'eh, keneged ozno ve'eno shomeya, en ebed yoseh bahen. However, if he strikes him not on his eye, but near his eye, and then all of a sudden he can't hear, or near is his ear, and then he can't hear, he does not go free. Why? My tama, lav mishum debainan umdena, so ushma mina yesh umden linzakin, is it not because we make an evaluation? And in a normal circumstance, hitting someone near their ear or eye should not cause them a permanent injury. And so this is an unusual, his constitution is especially weak, that caused him to go blind because he was hit near the eye, but that was not expected. And therefore, the owner did not do an act that one would expect would cause him to be blind, and therefore the slave does not gain his freedom. So we see from here that with regard to damages, we're talking about damages here, not killing the slave, we do make an evaluation, and depends on the action. Is this action likely to cause such damage? Then he goes free, otherwise not. Is that a good proof? Lo mishum damrinan hu dabayet nafshe kedetanya hamabit et chavero patu midine adam v'chayav bedine shamayim kesad taka beozno v'chersho patur achazo v'taka beozno v'chersho chayav. No, the reason here is that he doesn't go free is because the slave, frightened himself. Right, the owner didn't do anything to damage him. Right, he makes a noise nearby, near his ear, and cause him to go deaf. Well, you can't count that as damages, as we see in a Baraita, someone who frightens someone else and causes him injury. But that's because he got frightened, because he's such a scaredy cat. But not because I actually did anything. You can't call scaring someone. You hide behind the door and shout at him as he comes by, and he goes blind or something. So that's just because he is so frightful. But such a person who causes that damage in that way is not liable in human court. He is liable in the heavenly court. It's not nice to do that. It is a problem, but you can't calculate a payment for that. And the Baraita gives an example. If you shout in someone's ear and deafen him, then he is not liable. The Baraita does say that if you grab hold of someone and shout in his ear and deafen him, then you are liable. That's because you're grabbing hold of him, so you have of physical contact with him, and that is a violent act. He can't get away. So yeah, it's not that shouting in the ear can't deafen someone. It can, and one would be liable in that case. But in the case where you're not touching the person, so they could go away, right? They could just be brave and stop themselves from becoming deaf and remaining in that situation, right? But this person is just too scared that they are stunned and they can't get away, and that's what causes them to go deaf, is their own frightfulness. So if a person is damaged because they're such a scaredy cat, so frightful, so weak, then it's not the fault of the person who scares them. And so too, in the case of the slave, if he hits him just near his eye or near his ear, that's not an act that should cause anything at all. Therefore, we cannot prove from here that we have to make an evaluation for nizakin. No, even if you do something small, a small amount, even if it's a feather or whatever, you would still have to pay damages. But the reason why he doesn't go free in this case is because it's the fear of the slave that he caused his own damage. So surely, if I do something that ends up, making you, fall over because you're afraid, but that's your own fault, and I don't have to pay for that. That's what this case is talking about. But otherwise, if I do something directly to you, even if it's with a small instrument that we wouldn't expect to cause a lot of damage, I would still have to pay. Okay, so that's no proof. Third proof, Tashema. There are 5 things that a person has to pay if he causes damage to another person. We evaluate them, and you have to pay them immediately, right? All 5. There are damages, pain, embarrassment, and also for medical bills and loss of livelihood. For those 2, one has to pay and continue paying the amount that would be required until the person gets better. In other words, we're going to make an evaluation. You break somebody's arm. Well, how long does that usually take? The medical treatment is going to be a cast. You have to wear it for 2 months. And so that means you're going to be out of work for 2 months. So we evaluate how long that would be until normally a person would get better from such a thing. And then that evaluation is made right on the spot, and one has to pay it immediately. Okay, so that's the beginning of this Braita. Teaches you have to pay all 5 immediately. Amadu vayamit navene veholech enotnin ela kemo she'amaduhu. If they evaluate that you're going to have to pay $10,000, that will be the medical cost and loss of livelihood as we estimate for a broken arm. But then it turns out that this person, the victim, progressively deteriorates and he's not getting better, and there's some complications and there's a problem. The perpetrator does not have to pay more because we made the evaluation, and this is a normal amount that one would have to pay for such an evaluation, so he doesn't have to pay more. And on the flip side also, amadu v'hibri notnin lo kol ma she'amaduhu. If you make an estimation that this is $10,000 for breaking an arm, and the victim, he gets better after 1 month. He just miraculous. He's very, very healthy, and his bones just go back, and he's back in work, and he still gets the full amount that we evaluated. That's what the Braita says. You pay everything, and it's evaluated immediately. You have to pay immediately, and whatever we evaluate is for all 5, including for medical cost and for loss of livelihood, whether it ends up taking him longer or shorter, he still pays the same amount. What can we learn from this Baraita? Shema mina yesh omed linzakin. See, we make an evaluation. We evaluate the person and see how long do we think he's going to take for him to get better. So we respond to this. Lememad gabra kama liksar miha maka. So no, this Baraita is talking about evaluating a person, how long he will suffer from the injury, and how long he will not suffer, how long will it take him to get better. This is not a question. For sure, you have to make an evaluation for each person. It's not one set amount that all broken arms are the same. It depends. How bad is the break? What kind of person? What does he do? And all that. So yes, that is an evaluation that depends on each and every person. Everybody agrees. That was not original question. Our question was regarding the item that's used as a weapon to cause the injury. that do we make an evaluation and say, listen, this weapon is likely to cause a bone to break and you have to pay. Or if it's not likely to cause a bone to break, then you don't have to pay. Do we evaluate, or do we say, listen, if you caused this person's bone to break, no matter what type of rock, big rock, small rock, doesn't matter, we go by the consequences. That was our question. The evaluation in this case has nothing to do with evaluation of the tool of the weapon used. So that is no proof from here. So fourth proof, Tashema, Shimon Atimni Omer, Ma Egrov Miuchad Shemasu La'edav La'edim, Avko Miuchad Shemasu La'edav La'edim, Shema Mina Yesh Omed Lin Zakin, Shema Mina. So this proof is valid according to the opinion of Shimon Atimni, who that we saw yesterday. And when the Torah says, if someone hits someone else with a fist or a rock. Why does it give the example of a fist? Well, a fist is something that we can evaluate because the perpetrator is here. He has to be in court in order to be judged, and therefore this is something that is available to both the Aidah, the assembly, meaning the judges, and the witnesses too. They can come and look at this fist, right? Let me come make a fist. Let's see how strong you are. Is it likely that this fist would cause this extent of damage? If yes, you have to pay. If not, then you don't have to pay. So too, anything that is unique in that it is available to both the judges and the witnesses, then and only then will the perpetrator pay or not pay, depending on the evaluation of that weapon. So we learn from here that yes, there is an evaluation, at least according to Shimon Atimni. We do evaluate not only cases of murder, but also in the cases of injury. Going back to a statement that we saw in the previous Baraita, that they estimate that this person, the time that it will take for him to heal and get better is 2 months, and so they make an evaluation that you're going to have to pay $10,000. But let's say he got better more quickly in only 1 month. Nevertheless, you still have to pay the higher amount. This Baraita supports a halacha that Rava taught, where he said if a person was injured, and we evaluate him that he's going to be out of work all day. You cause this person to miss a whole day of work, and let's say in a whole day he makes $200. Okay, so you're going to have to pay him $200. Now, turns out, you know what? He felt better. By noon, he already felt better, and he was back at work, and he's there. Nevertheless, the perpetrator has to pay him for the entire day of work, because that's what we evaluated. And from heaven had mercy on him and helped him to get better quickly. So that's his benefit. And so he gets paid for all $200 for losing an entire day of work, even though he goes to work half the day and still makes another $100. Okay, the Mishnah taught, Rakak v'higia bo harok ve'ha'avir. If someone spits upon someone else and the spit reaches him, and other examples, taking off someone's clothing, you have to pay 400 dinar. But this is only if the spit reaches him. If someone spits towards someone else and it lands on the floor, although that is also embarrassing, but that is not the same level as the spit actually touching the person, and so only in that case we have to pay 400 dinar. Amada papa lo shanu elabo aval bigdo lo v'nehveki biyesh bidvarim. Papa says when we're talking about that one spits upon someone else, you have to pay the 400. That's only if it lands on the person himself, on his skin, somewhere on his skin. The spit lands. That's very, very embarrassing. Then it's 400. But if it only lands on his clothing and doesn't touch his skin, then he does not have to pay him, at least not that amount. Why not? Because it's like humiliating someone with words. You call someone names, although that's also not nice to do, and that's other problems, but you can't evaluate damages just for calling someone a name. And so too, spitting towards someone and it only lands on their clothing, although it's also not a nice thing to do, it's not nearly as embarrassing and shameful as touching his skin. So only if it touches his skin do you pay the 400. In the West, they learned from, they say in the name of Rabbi Yosef bar Avin, that we can learn from this Mishnah that if you humiliate someone with words, although it's not nice, it's still, lashon hara and other things, but you don't have to pay any amount for that. You can't call that physical damages that you can calculate a payment for. Hakol lefi kebodo. Now the Mishnah said it gave a list of numbers, right? The 400 zuz for spitting or taking off someone's clothing. And then it said that there's a rule. It all goes by a person's honor. It's a sliding scale depending on if they're an aristocrat or a low-class person. Rabbi Akiva disagreed. He said one set price for all Jews because everybody's considered like an aristocrat. But Tanakama said it's a sliding scale. So according to Tanakama, when the Mishnah says 400 zuz, is that a leniency or a stringency? Is it a leniency to say, it's Mishnah is saying 400, that's the standard highest amount for an aristocrat. But if it's a poor person who is not so embarrassed by being spat upon, then he would only get 200 or 100 or 50. So the 400 is the max, but it really could be less. Or is the 400 a minimum? The 400 is for the poor person. But if it's a rich aristocrat who gets very, very upset and shamed by being spat upon, maybe you have to pay more than 400, maybe 500, maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000. And so we're saying that, and so when he says it's all according to the person's honor, that is actually saying that sometimes you could pay more. And this statement is meant as a stringency. Okay, good, important question. Tanakama we can figure it out from the statement of Rabbi Akiva, the response of Rabbi Akiva. He said, even the poorest of the poor of Israel, we consider them as if they are aristocrats that just happen to fall upon hard times, but they're still, they're still high class and still feel shame, even though right now they may have lost their money. Why do we consider all Jews to be aristocrats? Because they're children of Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov. Look at this great lineage that they have. So who cares if they have more money or less money? That doesn't evaluate their essential worth and their feeling of shame and embarrassment. Okay, so we see that Rabbi Akiva, his argument is you should treat everybody in a higher amount. So surely Rabbi Akiva is being machmir and saying you have to pay everybody the highest amount. So we can infer from that Tanakama, when he said this is the rule, he's disagreeing with Rabbi Akiva, and he's saying the rule is that, this is the highest amount, 400 zuz, that's for someone who is an aristocrat. But if it's a sliding scale, it's sort of according to one's honor. If someone is from low class and they're not so embarrassed, then you pay less than 400. But this is a good proof, so it's important to read the statements of the Mishnah in context, and you see from the conversation what each of them means. Now we had a story in the Mishnah about someone who disheveled, uncovered a woman's hair, and they went to Rabbi Akiva, and he said that you have to pay 400 zuz, and then the assailant said, I need some time. He needed some time to do a ruse to make her uncover her own hair, to lap up a little bit of oil. So we ask a question about the story. What do you mean give him time? The guy says, I don't want to pay right now. I want time I need more time to pay, or I need time to make an argument that she doesn't deserve this. Why do we give them time? Rabbi Chanina said that you don't provide time for injuries. If someone injures someone else, they have to pay right away. So why was he allowed to have time? The answer is, when it says that we don't give anyone extra time to pay, in the cases of injury, that's only injury that there's a loss of money. If you inflict physical damage on a person, and so now he feels the pain right away, and his losses, he lost his arm or whatever right away. So since there's a monetary loss, you have to fill that in immediately. But for humiliation, you didn't cause a monetary loss. You have to compensate the person for humiliation, but it's not a monetary loss, and therefore one is not required to pay immediately. You can pay eventually. Shemara omedet al petach hasera. Now, remember this guy, the assailant, he went and created this whole sting operation and had two witnesses hiding behind a bush watching as he broke a jug. And then she mopped up the little bit of oil and uncovered her own head. V'hatanya amar lo Rabbi Akiva, salalta b'mayim adirim ve'aleta chayres biyadecha adam rashai lachbol be'atzmo. So in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva said that although she caused injury to herself, which is not permitted, so Rabbi Akiva said one's not allowed to cause injury to himself or cause embarrassment to himself. Nevertheless, you caused her embarrassment, you have to pay. That was the language in the Mishnah. But in the Baraita version, Rabbi Akiva says that a person is allowed to cause injury to himself. Right? The exact statement of Rabbi Akiva is to this assailant, you went into deep waters. In other words, you did a lot of investigatory reporting and you set up a sting operation and you found this thing and you saw that she uncovered her own hair, but all you have is worthless earthenware in your hand. There's probably a double play on words. Cheres hanishpat is a general statement that means something worthless. In this case, the guy happened to actually break a jug, and so all he has is physically in his hand just a broken jug. So in other words, your argument is worthless because a person is allowed to injure himself, but if you injure him, then you have to pay. And so to here, she's allowed to embarrass herself, but you embarrass her, you have to pay. So the question is, how come in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva said one is not allowed to injure himself, and in this Braita, he says a person is allowed to injure himself? Rabbi says, no, it's different. If it's physical injury, that's what it meant in the Mishnah. You're not allowed to bash yourself on the head, gash yourself. You can't cause yourself physical injury. But humiliation, if you feel like making yourself humiliated, that's permitted. Wait a second, but our Mishnah is talking about humiliation, and that's in our Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva said, Rabbi Akiva said you're not allowed. So you can't say that for embarrassment it's allowed, because our Mishnah is talking about embarrassment, and that's what Rabbi Akiva says, it's not allowed. Now we have to reread the Mishnah in order to fit it in with Rava's answer. When you reread it as follows, right? Not Rabbi Akiva is telling him not only regarding embarrassment, where a person is allowed to embarrass himself, and so if you cause embarrassment to that person, you have to pay. Not only that, but even for injury, where a person is not allowed to injure himself, nevertheless, if he doesn't have to pay himself, but if someone else injures him, you do have to pay. So therefore, that's what Rabbi Akiva's argument was, even though she is willing to cause embarrassment to herself, but that doesn't make a difference to you. You're still not allowed to cause her embarrassment. And the same would be true if she feels like injuring herself and she's hitting herself on the head and you go or hit her again, you still have to pay, even though she is not allowed to do that. Nevertheless, the fact that you did it and you added, you have to pay as well. You do have to pay. Now we have a general question about injuring oneself. This is very important. Right? Is that true that you're not allowed to injure yourself? Atanya. יכול נשבע להרע בעצמו ולא יהא פטור, תלמוד לומר להרע או להיטיב. מה הטבע רשות, אף הרעה רשות. אבי נשבע להרע בעצמו ולא הרע. Braita regarding vows, right? The pasuk says להרע או להיטיב. If someone makes a vow to either not do something or do something, to do something negative, that would be against himself, or do something positive, that would be a good thing. Either way, if you make a vow, you have to fulfill it, and if you don't fulfill it, you're liable. So this Baraita asks, can it be, should we think that if someone makes a vow against oneself, that to cause oneself something bad, and he didn't do it, that he should be not liable? No, that's why the pasuk says lehara or lehetiv, to do something bad or to do something good. Just like regarding doing something good, it has to be something optional. In other words, if you make a vow to do a mitzvah that you have to do anyway, then that's you have to do mitzvah no matter what. So the vow does not apply to such a case. Only when if one makes a vow to do something that is optional that you don't have to do, then you have to make sure to fulfill it. The vow applies. So just like regarding hataba sabi to shoot, so too for something negative it has to be something optional. So I should therefore I will include someone who makes a vow to do something negative and he didn't do something negative, that he is liable. What do we see from here? That saying I'm going to do something, if I promise I'm going to hit myself over the head 3 times. So then do I have to do it? According to this Braita, you do have to, because that's called something optional. In other words, Braita is assuming that one is permitted to cause himself damage, and therefore, if you make a vow that you're going to cause yourself damage, you have to go through with it. So, is it true that you can't cause yourself damage? From here, we see that one is permitted. Amar Shemuel Shemuel says, no, we're not talking about a case where someone vows to hit himself over the head. If you vow to hit yourself over the head, do not fulfill that vow. That's an invalid vow. You're not allowed to do that. You can't make a vow to do something that's not permitted. Rather, we're talking about someone who makes a vow that will be to his detriment, but not in a way that's prohibited. For example, if he says, I am going to fast, right? I'm going to fast for the next, tomorrow, for the next 2 days. So it's causing him suffering, but it's permitted. If you want to fast, you're allowed to make a vow that one will fast. That's what this Baraita is talking about. But an actual physical injury, you're not allowed to cause yourself. Now the question is, from earlier in the same Baraita, mentioned that if I make a vow to cause damage to someone else, that vow is not valid, right? Even though I promised I'm going to punch you, so you have to let me punch you because I promised. No, we don't say that. So if Shemuel, you say that this part, the second part of the Braita, is talking about a person who makes a vow upon himself that he's just going to fast, we have to apply that the same also in the first half of the Braita. So would that make any sense that you can make a vow about someone else that person has to fast? Is it in someone's power to compel someone else not to eat, right? How are you going to do that? And the answer is yes, you can lock someone in a room. I lock you in a room without food for a whole day. And that's how I can vow that I will make you fast, and I can do that. So yes, it is possible to have such a case. Hold on, there's a Braita that says, what does it mean doing bad to someone else in the context of a vow? If it gives an example, I will hit someone on his head and cause him brain injury. So clearly it's talking about an actual physical injury, not just forcing someone to fast. Rather, it must be there's a machloket between various Tanaim, and there is a Tana that says that a person is not allowed to injure himself, and there's also a Tana that says a person is permitted to injure himself. So who says you cannot injure oneself? This Braita here assumes that you can injure oneself. So where is the Braita that says you're not allowed to injure oneself? Maybe it's this Braita quoting a pasuk in the beginning of Bereshit, told to Noach that that surely the blood of your souls I will require. And Rabbi Elazar learned from that from you I will doresh, require, I will seek after your blood. Meaning, if someone takes his own life, kills himself, then he is liable. Suicide is not allowed. So is this the source of the person that says you cannot damage yourself? Because here, you see, you cannot kill yourself, but that's not a good source. Maybe killing is different. One is not permitted to take his own life. That's very extreme. Suicide is not allowed. But maybe just injuring oneself is permitted. You just want to cause yourself a cut or bang yourself on the, break your own arm. So maybe that would be allowed. There's no proof from here. Ela haytanahu the Tanya mekarina lamet velo midarkei hamori. Amar Rabbi Elazar shemati shem mekareya alamet yoter midai loke mishum ba tashchit v'kol sheken begufo. Rather, it's from the following braita: someone who tears his clothing because of a dead person in mourning over a close one that died. This is permitted, and it's not called an Amorite custom. This is a Jewish custom. In fact, it's required. One has to tear one's clothing as a reflection of one's deep mourning. And even if non-Jews also do it, and they cut themselves, they cause themselves bad, nevertheless, doesn't make it not allowed. Right? This is permitted. And Rabbi Elazar added, I heard a tradition that someone who cuts his garments too much over in mourning, that's a problem about tashchit. Yes, you have to tear your clothing, right? You tear a garment, you can tear two garments, but if you're going to go tear up your whole wardrobe because you're so upset about the person that died, that is causing destruction, and you're not allowed to cause wanton destruction. Now, if you're not allowed even to cause damage to your clothing, all the more so, you cannot cause damage to your body. That's the source of this is the Tana that thinks one is not allowed to mutilate oneself. ודילמה בגדים שנה דבסדה דלה הדר הוא כי had Rabbi Yochanan קרא למנה מכבדותה. Oh, but maybe this is not a proof. Maybe clothing is different from one's own body, because clothing is a loss that's irreversible. Whereas a body, if you cut your body, you get better, right? You may get a cut in your body, magically your body heals. But clothing, if you cut clothing and you leave it, it doesn't get better by itself. And so maybe cutting clothing is actually worse. And we see there's a couple of examples of such a thing. Rabbi Yochanan would call his garments my honor, right? He feels honored by his garments. So you see how much he respected his garments. And Verav Chisda ki hava mesge b'nei hizmeh v'higeh. מדלי להו למנה. אמר, זה מעלה ארוחה, וזה אינו מעלה ארוחה. Rav Chisda, when he was walking among thorns and shrubs, he would raise his clothing, he would pick up his robe, so that his legs would get all scratched with the thorns, but that his clothing wouldn't rip. Which seems strange. Wouldn't you want to put your robe down specifically to protect your legs when you're going through thorns? Now he said the opposite. If I scratch up and cut my legs, they'll heal. But the garment, if it gets torn, it will not heal. So you see, he was more careful with his garments than he was with his skin. So therefore, there's no proof from here. Maybe, yes, you're not allowed, because of Baal Tashchit, to cut up your clothing, but maybe you are allowed to cut up your skin. Elahai tanahu detanya, amar Rabbi Elazar hakapar berebi. Matamud lomar v'chiper alav me'asher hata ala nafesh, v'chi be'eze nefesh hata ze, ela shesi'er asmo min hayayin, v'alo dibrin kavachom, b'ruma ze shelo si'er asmo ela min hayayin nikra chote, ha'meser asmo mikol davar achat v'kama v'chama. So this is the Tana that thinks that you're not allowed to mutilate or cause harm to oneself. The Baraita says that Rabbi Elazar Kappa said, named Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Why does it say regarding a Nazir that he has to bring Korban Hatat, right? Because he to atone for sinning against himself. What sin did he do, right? All he did was he afflicted himself by abstaining from wine. He said, I'm not going to have wine for 30 days, or however long he's going to be a Nazir. So we can learn a Kavachomer. If a person only causes himself relatively small amount of affliction by refraining from wine for a short time, and that person is called a sinner for refraining from drinking wine, then someone who causes himself actual harm by harming himself, hitting himself, cutting himself, then that certainly all the more so is called a sinner. And so we found our Tana who thinks that causing oneself harm is prohibited. Hakoses neti otav, someone who cuts down trees, one's not allowed to do so, but you don't have to pay, right? Because you own the trees. But if someone else cuts down your trees, then you are liable. So now we're going to go into the laws of cutting down trees. Taneh Rabba bar Hana kamed Rav. Shori haragta netiotai kasasta. Ata amarta li lehorgo, ata amarta li lekosuso patur. We have a baraita that Rabbi Rabbah Bar Chana taught. If one person comes and sues someone else and says, "You killed my ox, you cut down my saplings," and the other person says, "Yes, true, I did, but you told me to. You said, go and kill my ox. You asked me to cut down these saplings, but you didn't want these saplings there. You didn't want your ox. You asked me to." So if that's the counterclaim, he's not liable because we believe him, and he did it based on the instruction of the owner. However, Amar le im ken lo shabakt chaye libriyata. Rabbah Baruch Hana said this braita in front of Rav, and Rav responded and says, if that's true, it doesn't make any sense because no one can live like this. Kol kimine, is it in his power to assert such a thing? Then yes, you can get out of any damage. Where you can go and just burn someone's house down, and if they come and say, "Oh, you have to pay me, you burned my house down," you could always answer, "Oh, you told me to." So everybody can get out of payment for any injury based on this. So therefore, this is not a practical ruling. Amale ismeye. So the Baba Baruch Hana says, "Well, what should I do with this braita? I didn't make up this law. I'm teaching a braita, a tradition that I heard. So should I erase it? Right? Should I say this is not an invalid braita and not repeat it anymore?" No, we don't want to erase an oral tradition. It's based on something. Rather, let's interpret it in a way that will make it make sense. Now, we're assuming it's talking about an ox that is about to be killed, or a tree that's about to be cut down. Maybe it's it was worshipped as avodah zarah and has to be cut down or killed, or maybe it's a dangerous tree that's about to fall in the public thoroughfare. And so, since it's about to be cut down anyway, in that case, if someone cuts it down and I come and say, "Why'd you cut down my tree?" He says, "Oh, you told me to." Then we will believe the person. It makes sense that I would ask someone to cut it down if it's something that needs to be cut down anyway. Now, if that's the case, that's about to be cut down, then what is my claim? What am I suing you for if it has to be cut down anyway? You're doing me a favor. So what would I be suing you for in the first place? Here's Chidush, that I'm suing you because I say I wanted to cut it down. I have a tree that's sloping dangerously into the public thoroughfare. So it's a mitzvah to remove a dangerous thing from the public. So I went inside to get my saw so I can go cut it down and do this mitzvah. In the meantime, you preempt and you cut it down and you get the mitzvah. So I come with a claim against you and I say, "Oh, how dare you take away my mitzvah? I'm suing you for taking away my mitzvah." That's the case. And then you can answer, say, "Well, no, you asked me to." In that case, we believe you, and you don't have to pay me for taking away my mitzvah. And how do you know that taking away mitzvah is one is liable for monetary damages for such a thing? The Tanya v'shafach v'chisa misha shafach yichaseh. Since someone who slaughters a chaya or a bird has to cover up the blood. Halacha till today, you kill a chicken, you have to cover up the blood. That's a mitzvah. In fact, there was a case of someone that did shechita, and then after shechita, he's about to do the mitzvah of covering the blood. You even say a beracha on this mitzvah. But in the meantime, someone else came right away, preempted, and covered up the blood. And then the one who did the shechita brought him to court and said, "I wanted to do the mitzvah. He stole my mitzvah." And Rabban Gamliel said, you have to pay 10 golden coins to him because you stole his opportunity to do a mitzvah. We next analyze the laws of cutting down fruit trees, which we learn the prohibition from here. When you go into siege against a city, you're permitted to go enter into a siege to go against an enemy, but you cannot cut down the trees because you have to eat from the trees. They're necessary for human civilization. This tree, what did it do that you're involving it in the war? But there's an exception. If there's a tree that you know that it's not a fruit tree, then you can cut it down and you can use it to build your siege work. but a fruit tree is not allowed. Okay, so that's what the Torah says, but we're going to see that there are some exceptions to this rule. Amar Rav Dikla de Ta'an Kaba Asul Mikseseh. If you have a date palm that produces dates in the amount of a kav, then you're not allowed to cut it down because that's a fruit tree. But if it's already old and not producing so much, it's only producing a little bit of dates, then you're allowed to cut it down, right? It's not, one date doesn't make it a fruit tree. We have a challenge. We have, because another Mishnah teaches how much does an olive tree have to produce that you can't cut it down. It's only a quarter of a kav, and here you said a full kav. And the answer is no, olives are different because they're very significant, they're very valuable. So for different trees, you have to look at the value. For dates, a whole kav. For olives, a quarter of a kav. That if it produces a lot, then you cannot cut it down. But if it produces less than that, then already it's not so valuable as in producing fruit. You can use the wood. The wood is more valuable, and you're allowed to cut it down. And here we see the severity of cutting down a fruit tree. Rabbi Chanina says that his son, named Shibhat, died early because he cut down a fig tree early, before its time. It was still producing lots of figs, and he was not allowed to cut it down. Amar Ravina, vim haya me'ule b'damim mutar. If the lumber of the tree is greater in monetary value than the fruit, then you're allowed to chop it down. I mean, in the way that the wood of the tree is the fruit. That's worth more than the fruit itself, and then that's permitted. Tanyan Namehachi, we're going to prove that this is so, that you can cut down if the lumber is more valuable, you're allowed to cut it down. We're going to prove from this baraita. It says, Rak es asher teda ze ilan ma'achal, ki lo es ma'achal hu ze ilan serak. Noticing that there's double language here. Only a tree that you know that it is not a tree that produces food. You could have skipped this etz asher teda. You could have skipped that whole phrase. So why does it teach it? As follows. Rak etz asher teda. This is referring to a fruit tree that there are cases when you're allowed to cut it down. There's no other trees around and you need to make build a siege or whatever. Then there are cases where it's permitted. And then the second part, that it's not a fruit tree at all, this is talking about barren trees. So now we ask, if we're going to end up including that says that, and say that there are cases where you can cut down any tree, so why bother with the second phrase that this is a barren tree, right? If even a fruit tree you can cut down in some situations, then all the more so a barren tree. And so why teach anything about the barren tree? For precedence. If you have a choice, then you have to take the barren tree first and cut that and use that to cut down. And then if you still need a two and there's no other barren trees around, only then can you cut down the fruit tree if an emergency and you need it to win the war. Now, would I think that you're even not allowed to cut down a fruit tree if the lumber is worth more than the fruit? That's why it says the word rak as an exception to the rule that even if it's a fruit-bearing tree, but the lumber is worth more, you're allowed to cut it down, and that's proof for the halacha that we just learned before. Shemuel has a couple of stories. Aitile arise tamre. Achil taim lehu ta'ama de chamra. Shemuel had a sharecropper, and the sharecropper brought him some dates from his field, and he ate the dates, and he tasted like the dates tasted like wine. And he says, "What's going on here?" Amale maihai, amale bene gufne kaimi. And the sharecropper explained that the dates are growing right in the middle of the vines, and so some of the taste of the grapes is going into the dates. Amar mechashe bechamra kulehai lemachar atili mekuraihu. So Shemuel realized that the dates are are weakening the vines. If they're taking so much of the flavor of the grapes, that means the grapes are not going to be as tasty, and this is a problem. The grapes are worth more than the dates. So he says, tomorrow I want you to bring me the marrow of the date, meaning the date, of the date palm. We're talking about the heart of palm, right? The hearts of palm, you have to actually cut down those branches in order to eat the hearts of palm. So in other words, he's saying, I want you to cut down the date palm because it's damaging the wine. So you see here another example where it's permitted to cut down a fruit tree in order to have more benefit from the more valuable, the other fruit tree that's more valuable. Rav Chisda chaza tale be gufne amad le larise akrinhu gufne hakane dikle la kane gufne. Similarly, Rav Chisda saw that date palms were growing among the grapevines, and so the date palms are going to take some of the nourishment and weaken the grapevines. So he told his sharecropper, I want you to go and uproot the date palms. Why? Because you can always purchase date palms with grapevines because grapevines are more valuable, but you cannot purchase grapevines with date palms, and therefore you go buy the thing that's more valuable. So therefore, just like before, we saw that if the lumber is more valuable, then you can cut it down. So too, if it's between two different fruits, then you can cut down the one that is less valuable. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.